This video is sponsored by Squarespace, the Antoine Dupont of website builders.
Talk to us about debt, bro.
Sometimes there are no wrong answers. Brainstorms, job interviews, a particularly easy multiple choice quiz, anything you say is valid, even correct, a dream situation for creativity, expression, ideas. The fear, however, with an open-ended question, is sometimes you find yourselves in a situation where instead there is no right answer, where every suggestion is a scream into the void, a piss into the wind, a frog looking up from a well. Next weekend, the Welsh National Rugby Union team will look to avoid suffering a 10th successive Test match loss. A shoddy Six Nations and an unsuccessful tour of Australia this summer, pushing them just one away from equaling their record losing streak. One of rugby's proudest nations has found itself now inches away from rock bottom. Now used to being so far down the world rankings, finishing 4th in the Six Nations would give them the bends. Gatland probably considering calling up the Dragons' third choice scrum half because it's the only way the squad will see hope. Cymru are in the wind, the well, the void. Damned if they do, damned if they don't. A team low on confidence, running into walls so long they've lost belief they'll ever give way. And all of this now leaves them faced with one question. A simple yes or no that somehow manages to be entirely open-ended. Should Wales's greatest ever coach, Warren Gatland, stay or go? It's a question for very definitive right and wrong answer. The only problem is there's no way we can know which is which without hindsight or time travel. It's a question that'll be open-ended for the next few years. Between 2007 and 2019, Gatland led Wales from their lowest ever world ranking and worst ever World Cup performance to 3 Grand Slams, 4 Six Nations, 2 semi-finals and the world #1 spot. The first time the team who had dominated rugby during the 1990s and 70s had ever hit the formalised high since the ranking's inception. Yet in 2024, fortunes are reversed. Warren Gatland, on his second spell in the job, has taken Cymru to a brand new worst ever world ranking, their worst Six Nations in 21 years, and is on the brink of creating a World Cup seeding which might require a miracle to overcome. He's done it before, but this is not before. So instead of a pub debate or calculated fence it, I think it's time to project as best possible what does a world where Warren Gatland goes look like versus what does one look like where he stays, based on careful analysis of the current Wales team, Warren Gatland's previous experience with rotting sides, the other options on the table and the broader situation in Wales, because this isn't something Cymru can put off any longer. We might not know the right answer, but at the end of this autumn, Wales is going to have to make a choice and pick their route. Should Warren Gatland stay or go? Whilst things are feeling pretty bad right now, it's worth drawing some context and comparison. The second test against Australia marked Wales' 9th successive test loss, just one behind their previous longest ever streak of hit, 10 matches under Steve Hansen, eventually ending in 2003. However, whilst the red feels more faded than ever right now, this was actually the third time Warren's Wales have gone 7 or more straight games without a win, previously slipping up in 2016 and 2012 to 13. In fact, it goes further. If you look over every team Warren Gatland has ever coached, Connacht, Ireland, Wasps, Wales, Chiefs, each one of them has gone through at least one toxic cycle of losses similar to Wales right now. To coin a phrase, Gatland has always been a snowball coach. When things are going badly, they tend to just keep getting worse. As Ireland boss, he once went 10 games with just 1 win, including losses to the Griquas and Western Province. With Wasps, their chance at 4th successive premiership slipped away when they fell into a 2 wins in 10 games rut. And perhaps the finest example of this came during his short-lived spell with the Chiefs, where a commonly forgotten great start to the season was cut short by COVID, and when things resumed, momentum was lost, their winning streak was well over, and the Chiefs went on to lose every single game of Super Rugby Aotearoa. 8 straight miserable afternoons in that most delightful of years, 2020. And yet, over a near 30-year career, every team Warren Gatland has coached shares one other core attribute. True to the sacred text that is the sports movie, triumph over adversity. He pulled Ireland out of rut, got Connacht overperforming, Wasps from relegation contenders when he arrived to double European champions, and took a team who are literally Wales to the world #1 spot on a 14-game unbeaten streak. Every Gatland team has long stretches of both successive wins and successive losses. The snowball works in both directions, leading to situations like 2019 where Gatland infamously said Wales had forgotten how to lose. The losses might become legion, but the wins become silverware. The current situation isn't a case of a legendary coach losing his magic, but rather a part of the process we all tend to forget once the win streak rolls around and those medals line up in the cabinet. As such, if he's to win, if we're to eye up the universe where Warren remains, this prompts 3 questions. Why do his sides always play out this cycle? Can we possibly be sure he'll get that big win required to turn it around? And where can he go to build a beautiful website simply? That, of course, would be Squarespace, With his son Bryn now in Japan and him back in Wales, Wales coach Warren Gatland at Rugby found himself hoping to start a blog to share his experiences with his son. A collaborative blog, perhaps even, where they could both post their experiences of their respective newfound homes across the world. And with Squarespace, he could put one together in mere minutes with a whole website to go alongside it. Him and Bryn able to make posts and share comments and so much more besides building out other features, integrating videos of the time they're spending in training and walking around Pontyclise. So fast and easy, thanks to Squarespace's new AI features, he needed to pull no focus away from his rugby work. The whole thing put together in moments. And if you want to do the same and build your own lovely, beautiful website, you can use the offer code SQUIDRUGBY to save yourself some money. Now, I've always defined Warren Ball, Gatland's signature style of play, as rugby built around effort instead of skill, speed or power. The way Warren's way was played changed a lot from 2008 to 2019. There were periods where they dominated possession, playing countless phases to wear an opposition down, while in others they kicked early and often wanting to defend more than attack. And yet the identity of the side remained. They were a team whose sole USP was their work rate, no matter how that manifested itself. It comes back to Gatland's old mantra, that his team should always be the best at doing the things that require no talent. And frankly, it's a perfect fit for Wales at the minute, a nation whose history is tied up in toil. Gatland once said, having coached all around the world, the Irish think about the game more, the Kiwis have the strongest instincts, the English are the most outspoken, but he's never come across a group of players that works harder than the Welsh. So why isn't it working at the moment? As anybody who's ever been depressed or burnt out can tell you, no matter what a workaholic you are, if emotionally you aren't in the right place, working hard becomes more like hard work. Everything becomes more difficult. Your effort levels drop as you start to wonder why. What's the point in producing so many bloody videos about sports intent and killing yourself through content? And what's the point in doing the whatever your work is? What's the point in doing it? Successful Warren Ball teams go for an awful lot in 80 minutes. Wales have completed more tackles than anybody else in the pool stage of 4 World Cup tournaments in a row now, and the entire top 3 on the all-time chart of most tackles by a winning team in the history of international rugby are all from Wales teams coached by Warren Gatland. Rugby is a fundamentally emotional game. Making a tackle, making a carry is an emotional process. You need to be motivated and in the right mindset to smash someone back, to get back up off the floor, to give everything chasing a kick or run back into position again. If your game plan is built around work rate, kick chase, making lots and lots of tackles, if you're not motivated, if you don't buy into the game plan, if you figure this is just going to result in a loss anyway, if you're ground down by last week's result where you went through all this work, you went through all this effort, and you just lost anyway, that effort level drops. Even if it's only by 10%. It's human nature. You're always going to try a little harder if you know it's likely to result in a win, if there's a reward on the other side. Subconsciously, your effort level is always going to be lower if you don't believe in the game plan and you feel like you've lost already. In a normal team, this is negotiable. This is fine and doable. But in a game plan that's built entirely on effort, that 10% matters. It's the 10% between winning the game and losing by 20. And so, suddenly, when just 5, 6, 7, or even 10 falls away, the loss becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. Rugby is a fundamentally emotional game, and Warren Ball is the most emotional game plan of them all. If your team aren't emotionally right, it just doesn't work. But if they are, if they properly, truly are emotionally in the right place, Warren Ball becomes a bomb dropped into the rock, paper, scissors of Test rugby. Skill beats speed, speed beats power, power beats skill, but effort can shut down all of them, because it also works the other way around. In 2018, off the back of a middling Six Nations, delivered by an aging edition of the Cymru show, a fresh group of young Welsh players took on Argentina in a 2-test series that summer. And when Warren Ball delivered them 2 wins, the team bought in. Gatland that autumn committed, rewarding those players, giving them big starts in the home stadium, and morale grew. Belief in their effort-based game plan became absolute. Before you knew it, Wales had their best ever autumn series, unbeaten, including a first victory of Australia in a decade and a win over the Rassie Erasmus era Springboks. This became a Six Nations Grand Slam, their longest ever winning streak, and very almost a trip to the World Cup final. That tour of Argentina and the belief it built almost created the greatest Welsh team since the 70s. There's some consensus that Warren Ball is too conservative to work these days, that is out of date, but I don't believe that for a second. Warren Ball might be the only time-proof game plan. It's built to withstand anything, provided the emotional circumstances are right, and Gatland's continued to tweak and twist it over the decades since. Wales' losing streak is growing because they're on a losing streak, rather than because something is fundamentally wrong with the way they play. And as such, the world in which Gatland stays, for me, comes down to nothing Wales actually do on the pitch, nothing tactical or technical, but rather, can Warren Gatland get Wales in the right place emotionally? And this is where the question becomes infinitely more open-ended. Perhaps the best way to dig into this, especially considering Gatland's already prepped his players for waterboarding, so we aren't exactly going to get the facts of how anyone's feeling directly, is to look at how Wales responded to those two previous losing streaks in 2012 and 16. Both of Cymru's taste of Italia came in seasons following a World Cup where Wales had overperformed expectations pre-tournament, much like in 2024. That's this year, for anyone who hasn't looked at the calendar. In 2012, Wales followed up a Six Nations Grand Slam with a winless tour of Australia. Familiar. Each game more crushing than the last. First test off the pace, then two late winning penalties, gutting Wales, just emotionally tearing their heart and soul out, leading to a team low on belief, reluctantly following the plan through an awful autumn, a first ever home loss to Argentina, then to Samoa, before losing again against the Wallabies and All Blacks. And it looks set to continue in the Six Nations as Ireland found themselves 30 points to 3 ahead in Cardiff, only for things to change at half-time out of nowhere. One consolation try turned into another, Wales falling just short, but their comeback turning the game around, confidence growing into a win against France 1 week later. Streak over, Wales improved week on week as they started to believe and turn everything on its head, beating England in the final game by that very familiar 30 points to 3 scoreline to win the title. 2016 was a different story. There were wins in the Six Nations but shoddy performances throughout. Wales had that arse handed them at Twickenham before heading down to New Zealand, where 3 test losses were the least of their concerns. Wales lost 40 points to 7 to the Chiefs, a club side shorn of their best players off playing for the All Blacks against Wales, who they were also beating. Stephen Donald named man of the match, James Lowe kicking conversions, 6 tries to 1 to Warren Gatland's old home province. One of the most humiliating days in the history of Welsh rugby, and a day from which Warren knew he had to learn. And so his whole approach changed. Wales's free squads over 2017, the following year, featured 20 uncapped players, 6 of whom would go on to play in the semi-final of the 2019 World Cup. The year was essentially a free hit. Big wins over Ireland and struggling South Africa, the only standouts in the season of mediocrity, where Gatland bedded in instead combinations, sorted wheat from the chaff, and narrowed those 20 down to 10 who could mix it at the highest standard, who would carry on beyond that experimental year. What we're currently witnessing with Wales is 2017 Mark II, except with 2 notable changes. One, the standard Test rugby is just so much higher now than it was back then. It's just frankly better. There are more good teams where Wales could then rely on Italy or Tonga as an easy win, and South Africa were in a bit of a rut, so they're about level and, they could pull off a game there. The cliche about no easy games these days is genuinely kind of true, and Fiji are not a banana skin game anymore, but a proper Test team who they're going to need to throw everything at. And so, instead of a Six Nations where they beat Italy and then maybe narrowly scrape a win against a struggling Scotland, they ended up with a wooden spoon. But more importantly, number 2, 2017 Gatland had the luxury of experimenting whilst keeping hold of a core of experienced players around them. When Wales took on Australia in 2017, their bench contained just 2 players capped before the start of the calendar year, and those 2 had just 18 appearances between them. However, the starting 15 had Alan Wyn-Jones, Dan Biggar, Lee Halfpenny, Ken Owens, Talupe Faletau, all players 6-7, in Alan Wyn-Jones' case, 11 years into their Test careers. When Wales played Australia in the first Test this summer, the Cymru side contained 3 players from that class of 17, 1 who predated it, and just 1 other player in the full 23 with 5 years or more of international experience, Aaron Wainwright, winning his 50th cap that afternoon, which made him the 2nd most experienced guy in the side. For reference, he would have been the 9th most experienced in the 2017 team. This is a much more forgiving situation to be blooding players into. You have guys to be learning off, guys who you can set your tempo by, guys you've grown up watching, that allows you to build in confidence as a young player. Something Wales simply don't have now, largely thanks to the approach that Gatland's interim replacement, Wayne Pivac, took to bringing through players. Instead of building depth, Pivac looked to build options. He handed out a staggering number of new caps, and yet would generally give them 2 or 3 caps each, so they had an extra option there they could call up if needed, rather than building players into 20, 30, 40 cap regulars. It's left Wales now shorn of experienced mid-career players, like the role Biggar, Halfpenny, Owens, Faletau were in for those coming through in 2017. Gatland gave that 17 crop a full year of rotating in and out, getting time off the bench, getting odd games here and there, before the kids got their chance in Argentina 1 year later and kickstarted that climb into the most successful Welsh side of the professional era. Gatland teams are the ultimate confidence sides. Just as in both 2012 and 2017, it may take Wales now just 1 win to turn that rut into a winning run, for belief to grow, that 10% to come back, standards to increase dramatically. But the question becomes, with this inexperienced team, with this lack of experience, with the losing run continuing, where and how do they get that 1 win? Cymru's Six Nations was pretty aimless. Much of it spent chasing a more expansive attacking game, something that may come as a surprise to people with memories who accurately remember Wales kicking the ball away miserably all Six Nations long. However, the problem wasn't how often Wales kicked, but when and in what circumstances they did it. Here, in the tournament opener, Wales go wide off a succession of phases first play, trying to open Scotland up. However, simply put, the Welsh attack is not very good. It's predictable, simple shapes, failing to hide strike runners. They're really predictable old school moves. The defence is set before the attack consistently. They just keep getting caught behind the game line, losing ground phase on phase, until after a few stabs, Sam Costello figures this is a lost cause and boots the ball away. This became the story of the tourney. Wales trying to play expansive rugby off the first few phases, but doing it so badly they had no choice but to hoof it in the air instead of losing more ground. Where successful teams like Ireland and France kick first and then look to open up space in order to attack, Wales were doing the opposite. It led them constantly kicking on the defensive team's terms. The side without the ball was almost always the one going forwards and hence dictating Wales' decision making. I mean, in Cymru's kicking was just playing into the opposition's hands. Their backfield better set than any Welsh chase, allowing them to start thinking about plotting a counterattack before the ball was even in the air. Wingers Rio Dyer and Josh Adams are both exceptional on the kick chase, and it frankly became the main thing keeping Wales in games. 2024 was actually the least Wales have kicked in a Six Nations since 2017. Even in their own 22, Wales ran an astonishing 49% of the time, the most of any Tier 1 nation this year, more than twice as often as England and Ireland. It felt like watching a team play the way your uncle always says they should, running everything, never kicking, never varying the play, and getting the result we would get if your uncle was Wales coach, making them really, really easy to defend, just resulting in them booting the ball emptily to the opposition every so often because they had no other options. Against Australia, however, Wales changed this up and returned to Warren ball. Instead of playing wide first, Wales follow up a strong carry here with a kick immediately whilst on the front foot. This allows them to get a chase in position and set better than the opposition backfield. Or here, straight after half-time in the first test, Wales have set their chase up in perfect position from the kickoff, Bevan hanging an inch perfect kick which Dyer can recover in the air. Cymru then working wide and opening up so much more space on the opposite wing. It creates a try-scoring chance and ultimately grants Wales a 5-metre scrum from which they score 3 points to get a penalty. This is so much better than the naive way Wales are trying to run out their own 22 in the Six Nations, and it also leads to stuff as simple as this. Rio Dyer here scores because Australia have 3 players in the backfield to cover for a kick just in case. Callaway not on his wing. When his opposite man gets the ball, Dyer bursting through and scoring. It opens up space all around the field as well as chances for the counter-attack in that first test. With a new squad in place, Warren Gatland attempted something very different in the Six Nations, an attack first, Warren ball second strategy, and it was pretty much a disaster. This summer, he abandoned pretense and reversed it. Effort-based first, then always be prepared to pounce if it opens up wide. Wales lost both tests this summer, but it was hard to argue the pair performances weren't a step up from the Six Nations. Both lost on individual moments of error, of, more often than not, going away from the game plan, or that 10% just dropping off, having lost the last few games. Warren ball rules suggest if there's no chasers around, Josh Hathaway here should either look for touch or hang it in the air to give himself time to become the chaser himself. Instead, however, the 20-year-old debutant diverts from the plan and puts in a pretty horrible rushed kick with no real chase that allows Tom Wright so much time to launch a counterattack, the Mad Lad making a spectacular try that takes the game away. If Wales sticks to the plan here, if Wales play Warren ball, Wright is given no space and the margin likely remains at 2 points heading into the closing stages, with Sam Costello coming on and moving the ball so much more against a tiring defence. It's a very different situation of dying minutes. The second test, however, was even more frustrating. This is a great kick by Watkin on the front foot, whilst Wales are going forward, whilst the defence is scrambling, and it should result in a huge net gain as per the game plan, but instead of just staying connected, Tame Plumtree snaps up to try and apply pressure, jumping out of line to make a hero tackle, and it allows Australia to launch one of the best counterattacks you'll ever see. You'll certainly see this year. Filippo Danguni eventually running in a stunner from one tiny error by Plumtree. And likewise, Danguni's overtry in that game is the product of a team low on confidence. Nobody's working back and watch the touchline. Nobody expecting it to stay in, compared to Thomas Williams' effort also against Australia back when Wales were winning in 2019. And every player is in a different situation. They're all getting back and working and expecting their players to pull off miracles like this. This 2019 side were a team who expected things to go well, who believed in Warren ball. But as Hathaway, Costello and Plumtree and so many more players' contributions prove, there's more to it than just confidence and belief. As a game plan so built on decisions, not structure, Warren ball demands its players, particularly its halfbacks, to develop an innate, incredible feel for the game and for the game plan. It's game management reduced to an instinct, like bullet chess with balls running at you. And this is where Wales' issues in the halfbacks become exponentially bigger than they already seem. Despite chopping and changing an awful lot in 2017, over the entire 4-year cycle between the end of the 2015 World Cup and end of the 2019 World Cup, Warren Gatland selected just 4 scrum halves and 5 fly halves. It gave those players, many of them youngsters, time to bed into their key positions and learn the game plan, learn international rugby, and make it instinct. In 2024 alone, with 3 games yet to go, Gatland has already selected the same number of scrum halves and more fly halves than in that entire 4-year period, leading to nobody having a clear nail on the jersey or feel for the game. It's the PVAC problem all over again. Even when the team was losing over that rebuild in 2017, I always felt I could see what Gatland was doing with every squad selected or team named. I'm not sure I feel the same way about 2024. Selections often feel erratic, frantic, knee-jerk, random. Players like Alex Mann seemingly being made first choice during the Six Nations, then not include the tour for subsequent squads. There's been a lot of criticism for him ignoring so many of the Ospreys players who became the first Welsh side to make the USA playoffs in 5 years last season. But the real issue isn't he's not picking Morgan Morris, but that there's no sense of identity or consistency to the back rows he is selecting over him. The balance of that back row seems to be changing every single week, which in turn rebalances the entire team. By replacing Alex Mann or Jim Botham with Tame Plumtree, a more athletic carrying 6, you're asking your type 5 to hit more rucks to make up for losing a workhorse type in the 6 jersey, which in turn changes the entire shape of your team when Hooker Dewi Lake is being used as your team's primary carrying option. And vice versa, if you bring Botham in for Plumtree, you're likely going to need to pick a bigger centre as well to do more carrying, which means you have to change the midfield, which means you have to change the whole backline, maybe move Mason Grady to the wing instead. It becomes a whole team issue. Gavin Coombs and Zach Mercer don't make the England or Ireland teams because Andy Farrell and Steve Borthwick have clear profiles of what they want in the number 8, and those 2 players don't fit it. But Morgan Morris, a very comparable player, doesn't make the Wales team because vibes? And yet, not picking a form player is far from the most egregious thing the man has done since coming back. For it's fair to say, Warren Gatland hasn't exactly covered himself in glory with the Welsh public since returning last year. Publicly taking the side of WRU employees sacked for misogyny, throwing a player under the bus for failing a fitness test, writing a newspaper column where he slags off his own players the day after a test match, making the controversial Corey Hill captain, describing the regions as sinking ships, and literally waterboarding the squad before the World Cup were bad looks. Yet Dan Biggar's recent autobiography outlines perhaps the most telling chapter, for with the squad threatening to strike ahead of the 2023 England game over the WRU's exploitation of the players and inability to sort contracts for the coming season, resulting in players losing houses, being on antidepressants, being in a horrible state, Gatland took the side of his employer, not his players. It's on this front, not a game plan point of view, that coaches like Warren Gatland and Eddie Jones are starting to feel slightly behind the times. It's impossible to say as an outsider, but the ultimate decider of whether Warren Gatland stays or goes has to be whether the controversies that have marred his current image to the Welsh public have permeated the squad. If Warren Ball is built on effort, and if effort requires being emotionally right, is a team going to be motivated in the same way to give everything for a coach who wasn't there and didn't have their back during a generational moment of need, who publishes a Lions squad a few days before a game saying only 2 of their players deserve to go, who, like Eddie Jones, still uses very old school motivational hairdryer treatment techniques? I don't know. Wales play Fiji in mid-day's time, with the schedule perhaps perfectly set for the rebirth of the team. A game against a legit yet less prepared opposition, a revenge match against Australia coming towards the end of their long year, and then a match against the Springboks before travelling to Paris for the Six Nations opener. 2 games where nobody will give Wales a sniff, even if they win the first 2 comfortably, which gives them 2 chances for belief to grow, for Warren Ball to re-cement, for the 10% to come back, and for them to give 2 serious world-class teams a proper game. For me, these next 2 games are critical. If Wales beat the Flying Fijians and Wallabies, I'd give them decent odds on some form of revival and a reasonable, respectable Six Nations. But if they don't, better put some potato soup on because they're due another wooden spoon to stir it with. Whether or not Wales should fire Warren Gatland is an entirely open-ended question that, should the autumn not go so well, is bound to be brought up in the clubs and pubs across Wales. And yet, for all the theorising, thoughts and opinion polls, I honestly think the only opinion that should matter at all is that of the senior players within the squad. If they want Warren Gatland to stay, Gatland has to stay. If they're starting to waver, however, perhaps it's time to move on. Except, first, perhaps, we've got to take a moment to reflect on the fact there are some more questions. Perhaps we should check how airtight Dave Rennie's contract is in Japan, or Jamie Joseph at the Highlanders, whether Toby Booth fancies sticking around in Wales. Hell, maybe Ian Foster's free. Maybe Eddie would leave another job prematurely. What if Felix Jones fancies being a head coach? Surely Ronan O'Gara would never coach Wales. Can Wales even afford to pay Gatland out his contract with the union's finances in the state they are? Where would Gatland go? The Chiefs wouldn't have him back. Would they end up moving upstairs to a director of rugby position? Is that actually worse? Is that better? Would anybody even want the Wales job with the team in such a state? Would there be any value in the replacement? Would we end up hiring someone else and then getting rid of them prematurely just to bring Gatland back right before the World Cup? Sometimes there are no wrong answers, but even when you get to the bottom of those mysteries, it almost always just leaves you with more questions. Thank you for watching that. I hope you enjoyed it, and thank you from Will as well, who's definitely here. That was a proper look at Wales. It's been a long time in the oven, a long time coming. We've got loads more to come. We've got a look at England v New Zealand next week after that game is played. Obviously, we're looking to do more previews, more stuff on the Squidge too, the more Squidge Rugby channel. We'll look that up on YouTube to do some match previews, to do some reactions to other games, kind of cover games like the Scotland, Fiji and so on. As well as plenty more over the autumn, then, heading into the moments of the year, at the end of the year as well. I'm also doing for ITV the Gallagher Premiership Rugby Highlights show, which is on ITV 4 and 1 on Wednesday evenings. If you're in the UK on the ITV player as well, I'm doing some segments for them every other week. So there's one's just gone out as you watch this evening. Either has just gone out or is going out tonight. It's on ITV at midnight tonight. So please have a look at that. We're also doing a podcast on the 2014 Women's Rugby World Cup ahead of the World Cup next year. We've got a range of great guests, including Philip Suttiet, the former Wales winger, and who's on TV every single week, every game, I believe. So you'll be well familiar with her. She was fantastic value. And loads more. There's loads more going on. There's going to be all sorts. Don't you think so? Oui, le rugby. I'm good at ventriloquism.
Talk to us about Gets, bro. He's a bit of a hard taskmaster, but he's a man's man. I've got a lot of respect for him. How has he been, bro?
Yeah, he's